The day was bright and warm. The sky, with not a single cloud, was such a deep blue it almost hurt to look at. At the town square, the smell of flowers filled the air. Roses, sunflowers, daisies, all carefully laid out on a colorful cloth. Lucia arranged the bouquets with care, smiling at the few people walking by. Her light dress danced in the breeze, and her face shone under the sunlight. It was just another work morning. Among the hurried crowd came Rafael. Dark suit, dark sunglasses, phone glued to his ear. "If the contract doesn't close today, cancel everything," he said, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't see the fallen petal in his path. A quick slip, a stumble. His phone hit the ground. Rafael bent down to grab it, cursing under his breath. That's when he looked to the side and saw Lucia. She was also kneeling down, trying to gather a few flowers the wind had scattered. Her eyes were clear, wide, and seemed to smile without trying. They stared at each other for a moment. The noise of the city faded away. Only that moment existed. Rafael broke eye contact first, grabbed his phone, and stood up without a word. He walked away faster, as if running from something. Lucia stayed there, watching him disappear into the avenue. Then she picked up a petal from the ground, slipped it into her pocket, and went back to arranging her flowers. The day stayed beautiful. But for her, something invisible had already changed. Lucia spent the rest of the morning lost in thought. Every time she fixed a bouquet, she remembered Rafael's eyes. It wasn't just sadness. There was anger, too, like someone fighting something he couldn't change. The sun heated the square. Children chased pigeons. Vendors shouted offers of cold water. Life went on, light and noisy. When the church clock struck noon, Lucia decided to pack her things. Business was slow, and she still needed to stop by the flower shop to buy more flowers for the next day. She was putting the last bunches into her bag when she heard heavy footsteps on the sidewalk. She turned around. It was Rafael. He stopped a few meters away, hands in his pockets, an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, no one said a word. The sun reflected off his sunglasses, hiding his eyes, but Lucia felt that this time he was truly looking at her, as if searching for an answer. Rafael pulled something from his jacket pocket. A bill. "A bouquet," he said, voice dry, almost like a disguised request. Lucia blinked, surprised, but quickly smiled. "Which one do you like?" Rafael glanced at the flowers without much patience. "I don't know," he answered. "Which one do you think suits me?" Lucia held back a laugh. Carefully, she picked 3 flowers, a white rose, a small daisy, and a sprig of lavender. She made a quick, simple, and beautiful arrangement. "This one. It's light and strong at the same time." Rafael grabbed the bouquet without looking closely. "Thank you," he said, almost in a whisper, and walked away again, disappearing into the crowd. Lucia stood there, heart racing, the strong sun shining down on her. Maybe it had ended there, but deep inside, she knew it hadn't. The next day, Lucia returned early to the square. The sun was still shy, but the sky was just as blue as the day before. As she arranged the flowers, she couldn't help it. Her eyes searched for Rafael among the rushing faces. Nothing. Hours passed. The heat grew, the scent of flowers filled the air. Lucia was about to leave when she saw a shadow approaching. It was him. No suit, no dark sunglasses. Rafael wore jeans, a simple shirt, and seemed different. Less closed off, less hardened. "Hi," he said, stopping in front of her. His voice was softer, almost shy. "Hi," Lucia answered, adjusting a rose. Rafael looked at the bouquets, then at her. "Would you like to have a coffee?" Lucia was surprised. She hadn't expected that. Not from him. For a moment, she thought about saying no. She was afraid of leaving her routine, afraid of getting her hopes up. But there was something in his eyes now, a thirst for something new, a sincere desire. She smiled. "I'd love to." Rafael exhaled slowly, like someone finally setting down a heavy backpack after carrying it for too long. They walked off together, leaving behind the blanket of flowers and the noise of the square. The world felt new. The cafe was on a side street next to the square, hidden behind a small bookstore. It was a simple place, with wooden tables, the smell of fresh bread, and soft music playing in the background. Lucia walked in first. She felt the cool air conditioning and the sweet aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Rafael hesitated at the door for a second, like he wasn't sure he belonged in that kind of place. They chose a table in the corner, near the window. For a few minutes, they sat in silence. Rafael stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. Lucia watched the people coming and going, trying to calm the anxiety growing inside her. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he wanted there. Maybe he didn't either. Rafael began, then stopped. He took a deep breath, staring at his hands. I don't do this. I'm not used to talking. Lucia smiled simply. Me neither, she said honestly. That cracked something. A small break in the invisible wall Rafael carried. He let out a soft, awkward laugh and shifted in his chair. Yesterday, he began again. I thought I was going to lose it. Work, pressure, everyone demanding things all the time. And suddenly, he lifted his eyes to hers, a girl selling flowers in the middle of the square, and smiling. Lucia lowered her gaze, shy. I like being there, even when no one buys anything. I like seeing people. She paused. Sometimes I think flowers understand us better than humans do. Rafael stayed silent, absorbing every word. The waiter brought 2 coffees and a slice of cake. Rafael nodded briefly in thanks. Lucia smiled warmly. They ate in silence for a while. But it wasn't a heavy silence. It was comfortable, like 2 strange kids sharing the same park bench. After a few minutes, Rafael asked, Have you always sold flowers? Since I was 15. She shrugged. It's what I know how to do. Are you happy? The question came out fast, as if he surprised himself. Lucia thought before answering. Some days yes, some days no. But I like to believe things get better. Rafael smiled, a small, almost painful smile. You're different, he said, more to himself than to her. Lucia didn't answer. She just watched him finish his coffee, noticing how, in that moment, Rafael seemed less distant, less shielded. When they left the cafe, the sun was already dipping, bathing everything in gold. They stopped on the sidewalk, unsure how to say goodbye. Rafael ran a hand through his hair, uncomfortable. He started, then stopped. Thank you. For what? Lucia asked, smiling slightly. For reminding me, he sighed, that there are still flowers in the middle of the chaos. Without another word, he walked away. But this time, instead of rushing, Rafael walked slowly, and Lucia stayed there, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling that a door had opened. Slowly, but open. The next few days passed like a breeze. Rafael started returning to the square almost every day. Sometimes he bought a flower, sometimes he just sat on the nearest bench, quietly watching. Lucia pretended not to notice, but the truth was, her heart beat faster every time she saw him. They didn't talk much. They exchanged a few words, a few shy smiles. Small gestures that slowly painted a new routine for both of them. Until one Saturday afternoon, he surprised her. Do you have a moment? He asked, hands in his pockets, a hidden anxiety in his eyes. Lucia looked at her flowers, looked at the clear sky, and decided to follow an impulse she rarely listened to. I do. They walked side by side through the square. No hurry, no plan. They ended up sitting on the grass, under a big tree, where the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the scent of the flowers Lucia still carried in a small basket. The silence between them was heavier now, but not uncomfortable. It was like something was growing there, ready to be born. Have you ever lost someone? Rafael asked suddenly, without looking at her. Lucia stayed still. It took her a few seconds to answer. My parents. Her voice came out softer than she wanted. When I was little. Car accident. Rafael closed his eyes for a moment, as if her pain touched his own. I lost my wife, he said. 2 years ago. The world seemed to stop for a moment. The sound of children playing at the fountain, the birds singing. Everything faded into the background. I'm sorry, Lucia said sincerely. He didn't answer, just ran a hand over his face, as if trying to erase a memory. They stayed there, side by side, feeling the weight and the lightness of a shared pain. without needing to say anything more. As the sun began to set, Rafael stood up first. He extended his hand to her, helping her to her feet. "Thank you," he said without explaining for what. Lucia simply squeezed his hand firmly, looking straight into his eyes. There, in that simple, silent touch, something was said, something words could never reach. They walked back to the square together, each carrying their own scars. But for the first time in a long while, not carrying them alone. The following week felt strange. Rafael didn't show up at the square. On the first day, Lucia tried not to care. Maybe he had work, commitments. People like him had busy lives, she thought. On the second day, the square felt bigger and emptier. She arranged her bouquets like always, but the flowers seemed less colorful. On the third day, it started to rain. Thin, cold drops left the city smelling of wet earth and sadness. Lucia stayed under her small, improvised tent, watching the nearly deserted street. Each echoing step on the sidewalk made her heart race, only to slow down again when she realized it wasn't him. Deep down, she knew she shouldn't expect anything, but it was already too late. It was hard not to wait for someone who had brought back a hope she barely remembered having. At the end of the afternoon, she packed up the wet flowers and slowly walked home. The cold wind slapped her face, and each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the small studio apartment where she lived, she kicked off her shoes and dropped onto the mattress. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to convince herself that it was fine, that it was nothing, that maybe it had just been a passing moment for him. But then, the tears came, silent, stubborn. It wasn't deep sadness. It was that bitter feeling of being forgotten, of being too small for anyone to notice her absence. Meanwhile, in a glass office across the city, Rafael stared at his computer screen, seeing nothing. Messages piled up on his phone. The boss yelled on the other end of a call, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. He thought about her, about the way she smiled, the way she listened, and most of all, the way she didn't demand anything. That's what scared him. He didn't know how to deal with something so simple, something that didn't ask, didn't expect. It just existed. Rafael closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against his hands. He knew he was running away, from Lucia, from himself. But running was all he had learned to do since he lost everything. That night, separated by the city, Lucia and Rafael fought the same fear. The fear of trusting. The fear of making room for something that could, once again, hurt. The fear that, maybe, it was already too late. 2 days passed, 2 long, heavy, silent days. Lucia kept her routine. She arranged her bouquets, smiled at the few customers, organized the flowers as always. On the outside, everything looked the same, but inside something had changed. It was like she had lost a light she didn't even know had been shining. On the afternoon of the third day, as the sun began to turn the square golden, she decided it would be the last. The last day she would look toward the corner hoping to see him. The last day she would let her heart hang onto a hope with no promise. She was packing up the flowers when she heard fast footsteps. Her heart jumped before she could control it. She turned slowly. It was Rafael, out of breath, as if he had been running. Shirt wrinkled, worried expression. He stopped a few steps away, his chest rising and falling heavily. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He took a deep breath and started again. I got scared. Lucia said nothing. She just waited. Rafael ran a hand through his hair, nervous. I didn't know how to handle this. The way you make everything seem so simple. His eyes were red, not from anger, from fear. And I thought it would be better to run, like I always do. Lucia gripped her flower basket tightly. And now? She asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Rafael stepped closer. Now? He hesitated, fighting for the words. I don't want to run anymore. They stared at each other for a few seconds. The noise of the square seemed far away. The smell of flowers, grass, and fresh coffee from the corner. Everything became sharper. Lucia took a deep breath. I'm not perfect, she said, and I can't promise it'll be easy. Rafael smiled, a crooked, real smile. I don't want easy. What do you want? She asked, voice steady. He extended his hand. I want to try. With you. The world stopped. For a moment, all that existed was his hand, reaching out to her. Lucia looked at him, at the square, at the flower basket that represented so many years of survival. And for the first time in a long while, she chose to trust. She let the basket fall softly to the ground and placed her hand in his. The touch was warm, real. And in that instant, between fear and courage, something new was born. Something no past pain could erase. At the corner, a gust of wind scattered petals across the ground, and under the golden light of the sunset, Lucia and Rafael walked together, not as strangers who had met by chance, but as two souls who had finally stopped running. In the days that followed, Rafael and Lucia started seeing each other more often. They didn't plan anything. It just happened. He would show up at the square in the late afternoon, his tie loosened, his face tired but his eyes lighter. She would wait for him without waiting, arranging her bouquets, pretending to be surprised when she saw him arrive. Sometimes they wandered aimlessly through tree-lined streets. Other times they sat on the steps of the old church, sharing a coffee bought from the corner cafe. Their conversations were still short. Simple things. Movies they liked, foods they hated, funny stories from the past. But little by little, the silences between them stopped being walls. They became bridges. One evening, Rafael showed up holding a small, makeshift pot with a shy flower in the middle. I tried to make an arrangement, he said awkwardly, handing it to her. Lucia held the pot with both hands, as if it were something precious. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. The flower was a little crooked, the ribbon tied clumsily. But there was something there that no flower shop could ever sell. Truth. Rafael ran a hand over his neck, not knowing what to do with his own emotions. "I'm terrible with gestures," he confessed, almost apologizing. Lucia just smiled. "You're good at trying. That's what matters." The sun was setting behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The square filled with the sound of children laughing, the light rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Have you ever thought about leaving here?" Rafael asked, looking around. Lucia blinked, surprised. "The square?" "The city. The life you have today." His voice was serious, but soft. Lucia stayed silent. She had dreamed many times about starting over, in a place where no one knew her past, where flowers didn't have to be her only salvation. But she had never found the courage, nor enough reasons, until now. "I have thought about it," she answered firmly, looking into his eyes. Rafael nodded. "Someday," he said, like planting a seed on the wind, "if you want, I'll go with you." Lucia felt her chest tighten. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a rushed proposal. It was just a possibility. Open, free, full of hope. She said nothing. She simply tucked that sentence away inside her, like someone keeping a key to the future. That night, Lucia placed the small pot beside her bed. Before turning off the light, she looked at the crooked flower, the messy ribbon, the shy green of the leaves. She smiled to herself. For the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, life could bloom again. It was a Saturday afternoon. The sky was clear, the breeze was cool, and the smell of popcorn mixed with the sound of children's laughter. Lucia was arranging her bouquets when she saw Rafael approaching. But this time there was something different about him. His serious expression, his slow steps. He carried an envelope in his hands. "Hi," he said without the smile she had come to know. "Hi," Lucia replied, feeling a chill in her stomach. Rafael stopped in front of her and held out the envelope. "A job offer," he explained plainly. "In another city, much bigger, far away." Lucia took the envelope without opening it. She knew what it meant, an opportunity for him, a huge change, and maybe an end to what had barely begun between them. "Are you going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Rafael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she already recognized. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I thought maybe you would come with me." Lucia stayed silent. Part of her wanted to say yes, to go without looking back, to start over by his side. But another part, the part that knew the weight of abandonment, screamed in fear. Rafael, she began, swallowing the lump in her throat. I'm not like you. I don't know if I can just leave everything and go. He lowered his head. I understand, he said, and he really seemed to. But his eyes were sad. The silence between them grew heavy, suffocating. Without saying another word, Rafael touched her hand lightly, a silent plea for her not to let him go alone. But Lucia pulled away, almost without meaning to. And in that small gesture, something cracked. Rafael tucked the envelope back into his pocket and took a step back. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, before turning and disappearing among the trees of the square. Lucia stood there, hands empty, chest full of questions. That night she couldn't sleep. She stared at the small pot he had given her, the flower still standing, even a little crooked. Her mind was full of memories, their walks, their conversations, their comfortable silences. He wanted her in his new life, but she had to decide if she wanted to leave her old one behind too, not out of fear, but out of choice, and that was much bigger than it seemed. At 2 a.m, Lucia finally understood. Not every new beginning requires forgetting the past. Sometimes you just need the courage to carry your old flowers into a new garden. With that thought in her heart, she closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long while, she knew what she would do at dawn. The sun had barely risen when Lucia arrived at the square. The air was fresh, and the city was slowly waking up. In her hands, she carried only a small bouquet of simple flowers, daisies, lavender, and a white rose, the same ones she had chosen for Rafael that first day. She knew he would come, not because they had agreed to meet, but because somehow their hearts already knew the way to each other. She sat on the wooden bench in front of the fountain. Time felt different that morning, lighter, quieter. Minutes later, she saw Rafael walking across the square. This time, he didn't seem rushed. He didn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He carried only himself. He stopped in front of her, his eyes locked on hers. I still want to go, he said, voice firm but calm. But only if it's with you. Lucia felt the words sink deep inside her. She took a slow breath, gripping the bouquet tighter. I'm scared, she confessed, unashamed. Rafael smiled. Me too. And in that moment she understood. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to go anyway, even trembling. Lucia stood up. She placed the small bouquet in his hands. Shall we plant our flowers somewhere else? She asked, with a shy smile. Rafael took the bouquet as if he were holding their entire future. Let's go, he said, voice thick with emotion. He held out his hand, and without hesitation, Lucia placed hers over his. They walked together through the square, leaving behind the old blanket, the scattered bouquets, the lonely afternoons. Not as people running away, but as people choosing. As they crossed the street, Lucia looked up at the sky. There were still clouds. There was still wind, but there was enough light to start over. And that was all they needed. Months later, in a small seaside town, a new flower cart brightened up the main square. Behind it, Lucia arranged her bouquets, laughing freely, her hair tousled by the breeze. Rafael, sitting on a nearby bench, pretended to read a book, but every 2 minutes he looked up at her and smiled. They knew there would still be hard days. They knew fear didn't vanish magically, but now they also knew that together, they could bloom anywhere,